Good morning to everyone. We're learning now Tanya, Perek Yud Aleph, chapter 11, page 30. I just want to bring everyone up to date as far as where we are in Tanya. The Alter Rebbe here in Tanya is developing for us the prototype of the human being. And he calls the ultimate human being the Beinani. And it's using the Gemara and Brachas. There's 5 categories: 2 tzaddikim, 2 Rishayim, and the Beinani in between. And the Alter Rebbe says that if you follow it based on Shem HaMushal, the borrowed name of the word tzaddik, Russia, it refers to, how many brownie points? Do you have more reward than punishment? Is it half and half? And all of that. And it's true. And that's how we are judged, traditionally, which scale is going to tip, and it's all true. But the Alter Rebbe proved in chapter 1 of Tanya, in the very beginning, that that's not adequate. And that really, man and the 5 categories refers to the matzav hanefesh, the place of the person's neshama, their soul. Where are they at spiritually? And that's really what determines who the person is. And the Alter Rebbe uses the word b'shem hatoar. So we have 2 things: shem hamushal and shem hatoar. Shem hatoar means the description of man, the inner description of who man is. This was something that the Alter Rebbe set up in the very first chapter of Tanya, because as he begins his 53 chapters of developing these thoughts, he has to give you the groundwork right in the beginning. And he did that. Then he started to explain what the Nefesh HaBamis is, number 1, at the end of chapter 1. What the Nefesh HaElokis is in chapter 2. Then he spoke about the garments, the faculties of the Nefesh HaElokis in chapter 3. Then he spoke about this faculty, the garments of the godly soul in chapter 4. And so he developed the whole thing till he comes to chapter 9. And over there he says, okay, we now know that we have these 2 opposing forces inside, Nefesh HaElokis and Nefesh HaBamis, and they determine, in a sense, who you really are. So his question is, what are they fighting over? What do they want? So in chapter 9 he says, the domain, the arena that they come into to box each other out or to wrestle each other out is called the guf. I think it's a quote from Koheles or somewhere in Tanakh, that the Ir Ketana, there's the Ir Ketana, the small city, and they're fighting to capture this small city. What's the Ir Ketana? The Ir Ketana is the guf, the body. Okay. Then in chapter 10 of Tanya, the last chapter that we learned, the Alter Rebbe speaks about the 2 levels of tzaddikim. In today's chapter that we're beginning to learn, chapter 11, he speaks about the 2 levels of Rishayim. And then from chapter 12 through 17, he speaks about the Beinani. That's 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. 5 to 6 chapters of developing the real theme and thrust of the Tanya is potential man, average man, regular man, which is the Beinani. And that's why he spends so many chapters on them, versus Tzaddik only gives 1 chapter, which is chapter 10. Rishayim, the wicked, he speaks about chapter 11. But once we talk about the chapter 2 levels of tzaddikim, the Gemara says, there's tzaddik v'toivloi and tzaddik v'raloi. There's a tzaddik that has good and a tzaddik that has bad. Now, what does that make? It makes no sense, Yoini. If you're a tzaddik, that means you don't have any bad. So what does the Gemara say? Tzaddik v'raloi, a tzaddik that has some bad. So the Alter Rebbe explained, we're not talking about that he does something bad in actuality. We're talking about the fact that he didn't yet transform and convert completely every vestige of a desire for bad. There is still an iota of a desire in the heart of a tzaddik, v'raloi, that isn't 100%. And then he also said, not only is it from that perspective, but his hatred his despising of evil isn't absolute. There's a person who has a tzaddik v'toivloi despises what's 100% something that's against God's will. A tzaddik v'ralei, it's 99.9, it's not 100%. So now, in chapter 11, the Alter Rebbe says a similar concept regarding the Rasha. And just before we start inside, just to tell you, this chapter, when you learn this chapter, and you understand it, and you think about it, it's so marvelous how the Alter Rebbe talks about a Rasha. You know, in classical Jewish writing, from the Gemara to Kabbalah to Musar for sure, and even in Chassidus, and even in a lot of Chassidus, the Rasha gets a very bad rap. And naturally, why does Rasha get? He's wicked. It's wicked. Wicked Rasha's Rasha, right? When you will learn this chapter and understand it, and the Alter Rebbe is talking about that same Rasha, but at the same time, his conclusion is completely 180% different than the way most others conclude. What the Alter Rebbe says in the last few lines of this chapter, that even someone who's completely separated, and we call him Rasha Gomer, completely wicked. That means in actuality the person is a sinner. What does the Alter Rebbe said? Nevertheless, he still has a godly soul. You find me in Jewish scholarship and writing that conclusion black and white, like it says it here at the end of this chapter. You won't find it. I don't mean you won't find it by anyone, but I'm just saying, but derech klal, this was a shita of the Alter Rebbe, and if you understand this, you understand Lubavitch, what we've gone through the last 50, 60, 70 years with the Baal Tshuva movement and everything else, and the Rebbe's outreach. It's directly from Tanya. The Lubavitcher Rebbe didn't decide on his own that we have to go to Wyoming and be makar of a Jew who's who the rest of the Jewish world would say is a sinner and a goner. That begins with this chapter in Tanya. That's why Tanya is crucial to understand what Lubavitch does today. It's an eye opener. And like I say, at the end, it's only at the end that you'll see it, so it'll probably be next year or two. But at the end, you'll see what the Alter Rebbe says. He's a Rasha Gomer. He's not a Rasha v'toivloi. He's not a Rasha that has some good. Rasha v'raloi. He's a Rasha that has bad with, that means he's the worst of the worst. And nevertheless, the Alter Rebbe says, the Shechina, the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, on all 10 Jews, guess what? Even if they're sinners, like I've told you, they're sitting on the beach on Shabbos and sinning, right? If they come together, 10 Jews, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, the Shechina is Shruya. How can that be? How can that be? Make up your mind. Are they sinning or not? Is it God or not God? The Alter Rebbe says both are true. Outwardly, they're sinning, and they'll be punished for that. But inside, they still have a neshama, and that's why when they get together in one room, 10 Yidden, even if they're all Rishayim, Shechina Shruya. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating understanding of in a way of human psychology, because what it tells us even that there's always hope for a person. For a moment, let's get away from Yiddishkeit, Frumkeit, just for humanity. God believes in the human. If God wouldn't believe in the human, he wouldn't create the human. That means he believes in every human, even in a sinner. And this answers that, the question that we joked about at the Fabrengen, Yoni's constant question over the 5 years we're learning Tanya, all these, Jews, self-hating Jews and all of that. That's the answer. This chapter, Yoni, is the answer to your question. The end of chapter 11 is the answer to your question. And that is, punishment-wise, they'll be punished. They'll be jailed. There's tit for tat. You just can't do whatever you want. There's a red light and there's a green light, and you'll be ticketed. But it doesn't mean to say you can't do tshuva. Even if you're such a bad person, or even if you're so evil that you're a Rasha v'toivloi, a Rasha v'raloi, even such a person can do tshuva. And again, the Alter Rebbe bases it on a Gemara. A Gemara Sanhedrin. Akol Bei Asara, on all 10 Jews. It doesn't say in the Gemara on 10 Jews that are wearing tzitzis or a yarmulke or have an earring or this. It doesn't say. It just says Akol Bei Asara, on all 10 Jews. You bring 10 Jews into a room. Like I described it wasn't to you, I described it in my son-in-law's shul. I met in Kerem HaTeimanim, which is right there in Tel Aviv, Neve Tzedek. It's a very, fancy neighborhood today, with artists and restaurants. There's a little Teimani shul that the builders wanted to destroy, and they went to court and they lost. The judge ruled, it's a shul. I don't care if it's $4 al daled, and it's like, and there's one yid there, God bless him, he's keeping the shul going. So I happened to be walking around there with a friend, and we needed Mincha Ma'ariv, so we went in there, and it was an experience. Who comes into the shul? Someone with a big ponytail, with a stick, with leather, okay, and earrings all over his ears. It's like, you know what I'm saying? I wasn't on Melrose in Los Angeles. I remember the last time seeing that was on Melrose Avenue in Los Angeles. I hadn't seen the in Borough Park. We don't see it. And he takes a siddur, and he starts davening, and he answers Amen. And I just had to say to him, tell me a little bit. He says, one of my parents is Ashkenazi, one of my parents is Sephardi, my father passed on. I come to shul in his honor, and I say a bracha, and I say Asher Yotzar. I'm telling you, I was floored. You look at this man, and after when we left shul, he says to me, I'm into punk rock. Everything's about punk rock. You understand? It's exactly what Alter Rebbe says. He goes into daven, he davens with the minyan, and when he comes out, what does he say to me? Man, I'm into punk rock, and he just continues walking with a stick like a messiah, like walking with, wow, where did you come from?
I think he belongs in the Kabbah still.
Maybe we'll invite him there. He's not too far away. But what's my point? That's exactly what Alter Rebbe is saying here. Akol be'asor shchinta sharia. Akol be'asor shchinta sharia. You can look like a certain type, and you can act that way, and you could even come out of davening and say, I'm into punk rock, into leather, and whatever else it goes with that, which I don't need to want to know, okay? I'm a yid. I'm saying, Asher Yotzar. He tells me, I make an Asher Yotzar, and I make a Shakol Niyah B'Dvara when I drink a glass of water. You understand? It's not the Am Yisrael Chai. This is not the Yiddish person. And this comes from this chapter in Tanya, that explanation. So we're going to learn now about a Rasha. When you learn about Rishoyim, it's a little difficult. You're talking about part of us and part of the Jewish people, and you're talking about Rishoyim, but you have to know the conclusion. That's why I gave you the conclusion now before we begin. Let's begin inside now. Perek Yud Aleph, chapter 11, page 30. Excuse me. The Alter Rebbe quotes the verse, one opposite the other. Again, he used this, I think, in chapter 6. He uses it again over here. If there's something in good, there has to be an opposing sample in bad. Otherwise, Moshe, we don't got free will. There has to be free will in this world, because God wants free will, right? For there to be free will, if you have two kinds of tzaddikim, you got to have two kinds of Rishoyim. So the zelu umazem, Rasha v'toivloi, the wicked that has some good, l'umas corresponds to tzaddik v'raloi, to the tzaddik who has some bad. What does that mean? A tzaddik, what does that mean? The hainu. So the Alter Rebbe, when you see the word the hainu, he's explaining. The hainu, this means shehatoiv shebenafshei halikis, the good that there is in the godly soul shebemoichi, that rests in the mind of the individual. As we learned in chapter 9 of Tanya, uvechol hayemoni, and the right ventricle shebelibe of his heart. By this Rasha v'toivloi, it's kafuv ubotel legabe hora. It is subjugated and nullified to the bad that is by him me'aklipa, from the negative side, shebechol ha'smoli, coming from the left ventricle. In other words, Avram, this individual who we call Rasha v'toivloi, he is wicked but has some good. What does that mean? This a little amount, a vestige of good that he still has, is subjugated. It's outnumbered both quantitatively and qualitatively by the bad that the person does. How much of it is subjugated? Says the Alter Rebbe, v'zeh mischalik. This is also divided, gamkein as well, l'nimeres, madregas, chalukas, to myriads of many levels. Be'inyan kamos v'echos, regarding the quantity and the quality of habitl, of the subjugation, the kfifas hatoiv l'ra, chas v'sholem, of the subjugation of good to bad, God forbid. And he says, for example, Yesh misha hakfifa v'habitl, by one individual the subjugation is etzle ma'at mazer, it's very minute. In other words, the bad doesn't outnumber the good completely. It's a little bit. V'av gam zois, and even when it outnumbers it, eina b'tmidus. Number one, make a point here. It's not constant. Number two, v'loi todir. Leprokim kravim, and it isn't steady constantly, very often. Ella, number three, leikim rechoikim, it happens at distant times, not often. What happens? Misgabed horal atoiv, the evil dominates over the good. The koivish is the ir ktana, and it captures the small city. Hu aguf, that's the body. And even when it does so, it doesn't capture the entire body. Ela miktsosai levad, only a little of it. That the body should follow its dictates of stupidity and evil. V'nasale merkava, and the body becomes a chariot. Top of page Tezayin. Ulevush, and a garment. Lislabish boy, allowing some of the evil, vestige of evil, to invest itself in one of the three things, garments, which are dahainu. It allows the vestige of evil to get into action. Lasses averas kalos, but not to do very severe averas, to do easy, lightweight averas. Not heavy ones, God forbid. That's if the vestige gets into action. Or not both, or bedibur, it allows the vestige to get into its speech. Levad, ledaber, avak lashon hara. To allow it to speak the dust of lashon hara. There's hardcore lashon hara, and there's something in halacha called avak lashon hara, an indirect lie, a white lie, let's say, okay? Vilitzonis, or it allows us to be frivolous, ukahai gavna, and similar to these type of inappropriate speech, which isn't hardcore sin, but it tinges on, sin. Or it doesn't get into action, to your maisa, to your behavior. It doesn't impact even your speech, but this little vestige of evil, it impacts your machshava, your thought. Oiba machshava levad, only your thought, which are hirhure aveira, hakoshim me'aveira. Thoughts of evil that are more stringent and worse than an actual sin. Now this is explained in the writings of the Ralmi Prague, in the Siv Hapricius, where he talks about the issue of thoughts of sins being worse than sin. In actuality, if you could think about sin from today to tomorrow and you don't do a sin, you're not punished. But as far as the soul is concerned, you make a bigger dent in the neshama when you have thoughts of sin versus the actual sin. This too, Moshe, it's not a chiddush of the Alter Rebbe, but the thought itself is a remarkable thought. In other words, stealing. You steal, you've done an Aveira. What if I think about stealing? And I fantasize about stealing? And I plot a plot all in my head, but I never stole. Have I done an Aveira? No. Comes the Maral and says, not only the Maral, but before also, that Hidhuri Aveira Koshem, it's a Gemara too. Hidhuri Aveira Koshem, that's a Gemara. Hidhuri Aveira, that quote, thoughts of Aveira is worse than Aveira, is a Gemara. But the Maral explains it. Why? Because it touches the soul. In other words, when you do something with your hands, you steal something, it's one time. I stole, and that's it. And hopefully I'm going to do tshuva. In other words, Maisa, action, is a one-time thing. Yeah, you could do it another time, but each time it's an independent thing. But when something becomes part of your thought process, and I'm sure Hillel can tell us based on the psychology, the imagination and the fantasy, and I don't only mean in sexual matters. There, of course, it's very prominent, as we're going to learn soon. The example he gives from carnal sexual thoughts, which touches the machshava. But I'm saying even non-sexual issues, other issues, you want to plot. How am I going to get this person? And you think about it, and you plot it. It's all, your machshava. And the same, and if you think about it, there's so many things, even in Tov, in good things. How am I going to get a better job? And you're thinking about it, and you're philosophizing, and you're fantasizing, and it's like you've built a virtual world in your world of thought. Well, guess what? That world that you build in your virtual thought touches your nefesh more than actual stealing or doing. Because the sensitivity of thought impacts soul more than the sensitivity of action. And this explains the Chassidus. What does Chassidus explain? This is important to know. Chassidus explains that there are the three levushim, right? We call them the garment of thought, the garment of speech, and the garment of action. From the garment perspective, right? From the action perspective, action is action. Speech is called partial action, maise zuta. Thought is completely removed. So from that perspective, Avi, do me a favor, please put on your mute. But from that perspective, action is action, speech is partial action, and thought is less action. But from the perspective of soul, machshava is called levush hamiyuchad. It's a garment, it's an instrument, Hillel, that's yichud. It's united with soul. You cannot separate from the soul from its levush. Of course, there's the essence of the soul, but we're talking about when we talk about in this scenario of garments. What type of garment is it? It's like your skin. Can you ever be undressed without your skin? No. And God forbid if there is, if someone's burnt, it's a problem. But the average normal person, their skin is always with them. That's who they are. Clothing, there's sheer clothing, there's thick clothing, there's winter clothing, there's summer clothing, there's no clothing. Clothing is removable. In other words, it's not miyuchad. It's not united with nefesh. It's less bound to soul. So dibur, speech. Speech, we can be quiet and we can talk. So machshava, mishotetes tomit. Machshava thoughts flows always. When we're sleeping, we're thinking, and that's one of the reasons for dreams. Right? So machshava is constant. Why? Because soul is constant. As long as you are alive, you have a soul. So as long as your soul is working, your thought is working. Dibur, at night, we're sleeping, we're not speaking. Once in a while we have some sleep talk. But the norm is not to speak. Why? Because dibur already is less miyuchad with nefesh. It's less united with soul. So therefore, even though the soul is constant, you don't have to speak always. Action is even more removed. We could talk about everything and anything, and it's great conversation. And it makes a lot of sense. No? Did you put your tefillin on? No. You understand the importance? I understand. Could you know the halach? Put the tefillin on. Put them on. No, not ready yet. Action is removed. The same as in other, that's asay tov, in sur mirah. You know you shouldn't be involved in certain behaviors, and yet we're involved. So in other words, talk is cheap, right? So this understanding, Chassidus explains, is an explanation of why the Gemara says, Hirhure Havera, thoughts of sin, Koshim, are worse than sin. And here too, just for a moment, you could say that the Baal Shem Tov, the Baal Shem Tov, this was one of his, again, Baal Shem Tov maybe doesn't write it clearly.
You are where your thoughts are.
Right. Exactly. That's the word of the whole Teres HaChasidus. You don't find so much in Teres HaNigla and in that approach, you don't find this emphasis. Dafkin Chassidus, and Musar too, but much more in Chassidus, you find this emphasis on machshava. And like I told you at the Farbrengen, the story with the Rebbe Rashab, and they said there, the Chafetz Chaim was a contemporary, was older, whatever, of the Rashab, but he lived at the same time. He made a sefer Shviras HaLoshen, everyone kocht sich in what? In not speaking Lashon Hara, fasting, doing these Lashon Hara days and everything else. And in Chabad, by Chassidim Bechlal and Chabad as well, we don't see them putting any emphasis on this. On the contrary, you go into a shtibale, and this chassid said this, and this guy, you know how it is. So they asked the Rashab about it. So the Rebbe Rashab said what the Chafetz Chaim did is wonderful and special and everything else. But by us, he says, we put our emphasis not on what you speak about, how careful, but what you think about. And Moshe, it's a very deep point that's relevant today. It's not that a Babich or a Chassid says it's all right to speak Lashon Hara. That's shtus. That's nonsense. That's against halacha. It's not Torah. But put your effort into your machshava. Change the way you think, not just the way you speak. I told you that story. I was in LA teaching years ago, and I was speaking about these issues, and a woman raised her hand. I know her, God bless her. She said, my friend and I decided not to speak on the phone, because every time we get on the phone, we gossip about our friends. So we decided we're not going to talk. So I said to her, it's a good resolution, but why not decide, maybe talk about higher, more elevated, sophisticated things? And when you do that, automatically you won't speak about John and Jane and Jill and Jack, and this one did this to me, and this one is doing this, and all the cosmopolitan Inquirer garbage that's full of our society, right? Gossip, the New York Post, gossip, and one big piece of gossip. There isn't talk of Ruchnius talk, That's what we need to do. So how do you have Ruchnius that could talk? It doesn't come just from, of course, you see a Litvisher Gadol come to, there's a video, I told you about it, with two G'daylim, they come to a wedding and they're tearing themselves apart, Pshat na Gemara and Tosfos, So obviously, they have come to a point where their thought is basically a piece of Gemara. That's Gavaldi. But the average person is not that way. They come to a wedding, they like the piece of steak, they like the music, they like the dancing, they like the kibbutz, they like to talk. That's the way it is, right? That's the way. And in a way, that's the way it should be. It's an opportunity for people to socialize in a kosher way and all that, right? But nevertheless, when you change, one second, when you change the way you think, automatically you're talking. So I just want to finish. So the Alter Rebbe over here says over here, This is exactly what we need to know, that thought is the closest to the soul, so you have to change the way you think. And a Rasha, why is he a Rasha? One type of Rasha, he didn't do anything. He didn't speak bad, but his thinking is messed up. Yes, yes, sir.
There's a great story by Rabbi Miller.
Yeah.
That he was at a chasana, and his grandson went over to him and started talking to him. He said, "Can't you see I'm busy?" And the grandson was like, "No, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm thinking."
Yeah, that's that's a lost art. It's unfortunately a lost art. The whole idea of machshava. It's a wonderful story you said, and it's look around. How many people are lost in thought? Developing thought. Anyway, so I just want to conclude here. So the Alter Rebbe says here, and we'll continue. We'll add some more points tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem, some important points. The Alter Rebbe says here that the Rasha, the Raloi, doesn't mean that he's messed up in all three garments: thought, speech, and action. He's just messed up in one of the three, but it's adequate enough to put him into the category of a Rasha, right? And when you say a Rasha, you mean, in other words, when you think inappropriate thoughts, that's an Avera. That's why it's called a Rasha. You're not called a Rasha if you didn't do a sin. That's what. So whether it's dust of lashon hara, white lies, frivolity, or any of the other kind of lightweight sins, it's still enough to put you to the category of Rasha. But it's Rasha v'toiv loy. There's still good that's there, that's constantly saying, "Hey, change your way, change your way, change your way." And when you think about this, this is really who we are. When we talk about us, as I said earlier in the introduction to the chapter, we're potential Beinani, but we're not yet Beinanim. We have the potential to become a Beinani. So who are we, Hillel? If we're not a Beinani, who are we? Practically, if you ask that question, we're Rasha v'toivloi. What, Hillel, you want to say something?
Yeah, we aspire to be occasional Beinani.
Occasional Beinani. Okay, Chevra, have a great day. Wonderful reconnecting. We'll see everyone tomorrow. Zaygas and